Safe in His Arms. Contemporary Romance. By Nola King. Description.
She caught my eye right away, but before I could ask for her number, armed thugs tried to force her into a van. I managed to get her away, but now I've got to keep her safe until I can get her to her senator father's security detail. No one will touch her, that is my vow, but I can't help wondering how I'm going to let her go when we reach our destination.
The last thing I expected was guys with guns trying to kidnap me. If it wasn't for him, God knows if I would even be alive now. He's taking me DC, to my dad, who can keep me safe, but right now he's the only one I trust. He's strong, handsome, and protective. Can he stop the bad guys from hurting me? And can I stop before I lose my heart to him?
Chapter 1. I had never in my life wanted to be a piece of equipment before, but the way she was climbing those mechanical stairs, I was beginning to rethink my position. She was the hottest woman I'd ever seen at this gym or any other. Fit, attractive, with big innocent eyes and a determined look on her face, she was the epitome of my dream female. I wanted her. Too bad I'd never have her. I set down the weights I'd been holding while squatting, then started to wipe them down. A woman like the one giving the stair machine the business could be my downfall, which is why I avoided them like children's sticky hands at an ice cream shop. My ex-girlfriend wanted the white picket fence fantasy, settled in a house in the Chicago suburbs with 2 kids she stayed at home to raise. Too bad my being a former Marine didn't square with the whole suburban dad archetype. I'd seen too many things, done too many things, to think that settling into the suburbs wouldn't leave me bored and restless. I didn't relish the feeling of being little more than a well-trained dog, so I broke it off, deciding to work on myself as I readjusted to civilian life. I'd seen action in hotbeds of violence and pain. My unit was stationed overseas in some of the dirtiest holes from the Middle East to Central America. I'd seen things I hoped to never have to talk about, done things that still made me wake up in a cold sweat. I'd served my country, done Uncle Sam's dirty work. Now it was time to put all of that behind me and find something new to devote my life to. At the moment, that something was climbing the stairs to nowhere. Don't be ridiculous, I told myself. You have a plan. You're going to look for some innocuous job, sitting in an office with the other schlubs, and you're going to pretend to be normal until you finally are. Fake it till you make it is your new mantra. So far, my plans didn't include any female companionship. I was still too rough around the edges, too impatient to be the kind of man women expected. I wasn't docile, wasn't the type to sit around and watch television and talk about my feelings. But it might not be as easy as I'd hoped. One look at the girl with the smoking body, and I was considering changing my mind. Figuring I was just having crazy thoughts from being wiped out after my strength training routine, I hit the showers, thinking the hot water would wash those thoughts out of my head. But heading to my car in the parking lot, I caught sight of her again and made a snap decision. Making a beeline for her, I came to a stop a few feet in front of her. She looked up, caught off guard, and I tried for a disarming smile. I saw you on the machine in there. I admire your work ethic. Her first response was a puzzled look, and I wondered if she saw right through my lame pickup attempt. But a smile broke over her face, taking her from beautiful to downright stunning, and my heart skipped a beat in my chest. It's writer's block. I'm working on my master's thesis and hit a wall, so I'm just trying to exhaust myself until I can write again. Beautiful and smart. Nice. I'm Jax, I said, holding out my hand for her to shake. Ivy, she replied, taking my hand and sending electric shivers over my skin. I was about to suggest we grab a coffee, so she could tell me about her thesis, and maybe overcome her writer's block by talking it out, but before a word could come out of my mouth, a nondescript gray van screeched to a halt beside us. It disgorged 3 men dressed in black, who rushed toward us without hesitation. I saw one grab for Ivy and my inner alert system ratcheted up to DEFCON 1. Without hesitating, I launched myself at the man who thought he was going to put his hands on the woman by my side. They were messing with the wrong girl. And the wrong Marine.
Chapter 2. The guy from the gym was hot. I'd noticed his muscular frame inside, squatting with weights heavier than I was. My heart started beating hard when he'd come toward me, and I was half hoping he'd ask for my number before we'd been interrupted by something out of nightmare. A windowless van full of would-be kidnappers had descended, and I froze, not knowing what to do. Apparently, Jax didn't have that problem. Quick as a whip, he launched into action, grabbing me before one of the thugs dressed in black could lay a hand on me. I was shoved behind a car. Jax settled behind me, his hands on my shoulder keeping me in place. "Get ready to move, but stay low," he whispered against my ear. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so loud it seemed to be echoing across the parking garage. I risked peeking around the edge of the car's bumper and saw one of the thugs grab the gun tucked into his waistband and brandish it. "Come out," he growled, pointing the gun at the car where we were crouching. "My car isn't far. That's where we are heading. I want you to stay on the other side of me so you don't get hit." Jax grabbed my hand and pulled me forward. He paused for a moment to position himself in front of me, then shot out from behind the car, crossing the gap to the next row in a frenzied duck walk. I kept as low as I could, but I could hear the yells of the thugs behind us and it sent a rush of terror through me. Footsteps pounded the concrete floor of the garage, but so far, no shots had been fired. "It's in the next row," Jax said, then tugged me forward as we rushed from behind cover toward a blue sedan. I saw the lights flash above the bumper as Jax hit the unlock button on his key fob. "Stop or I shoot," came the shout from behind us, but Jax didn't hesitate. He pulled the door open and shoved me inside, onto the floorboard of the passenger side. Climbing in after me, he slammed the door shut and hit the locking mechanism. Then he was sliding into the driver's seat and shoving the key in. "Stay down," he said as he started the car and put it in gear. The car shot backwards, then rushed forward toward the garage ramp down to the exit. That's when I heard the crack of gunfire, one after another. At least one bullet impacted, shattering the glass of the back windshield. I let out a scream, covering my face. "They're shooting at us. What the heck is going on?" "Hold on," Jax hollered, then hit the gas. We streaked down the ramp, heading for the street in front of us while picking up speed. Then it was a right turn that had us fishtailing into the other lane, thankfully empty of cars at the moment. Jax kept the pedal pushed to the floor and I clutched the seat, holding on for dear life. I heard him curse and stared in his direction. His face was set in a scowl. "They're following us," he said, his eyes fixed on the rear view. I was too afraid to look for myself, but I could hear the horns of cars around us as Jax weaved through the traffic, trying to lose the van behind us. I sent up a prayer, begging for an escape. Who were the men in the van, and what did they want from us? Or from me, since I was the one they'd lunged for first? "I'm going to have to take bigger risks," Jax warned, his eyes flicking to meet my gaze before focusing on the road again. "Just stay down and I'll get us out of this." I didn't know how he managed to sound so confident, like this was just a run-of-the-mill car chase and he'd have us home by lunchtime. I was terrified, my hands shaking, my brain melting down at the danger we were in. Suddenly, he jerked the wheel, sending us skittering across the road and onto the sidewalk. We bounced over the curb as he skirted the building on our right and then shot out onto the cross street, whipping across it to hit an alley that ran between two buildings in the middle of the block. It was a narrow alley, but Jax sped down it, making a right when it hit another alley. Then we were speeding out onto a main road again, easing into traffic and driving at a reasonable speed as Jax kept his eyes trained on the rear view. A couple more turns and I saw his face relax. "I think we lost them." I didn't climb out onto the seat until he stopped the car and motioned me up. "We should be safe now." I sat on the passenger seat, realizing that we were parked behind some structure, not far from what appeared to be a loading dock. "Where are we?" "Behind a grocery store. I doubt they'll think to look for us here." I breathed heavily, trying to get a grip on the adrenaline that was rushing through me. I covered my face with my hands, closing my eyes and focusing on calming down. "What do they want?" I moved my hands, turning to face Jax. "I have no idea. It's clear they were after you. Why? I don't know. My father is a U.S. Senator, though. That might have something to do with it. Jax's brow furrowed. Call him. Call him now and tell him what just happened. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket, my hand still shaking as I pushed the button that connected to my father's cell phone. Daddy? I said when he picked up. Hey, there, princess, he said, his voice warm. What's up? Daddy, some men in a van just tried to grab me. His playful tone vanished. Tell me what happened. I told him about the parking garage and the man who'd kept me safe and gotten me out of harm's way. My gaze locked with Jax's, and a wave of gratitude hit me. If this handsome stranger hadn't been there, I'd be locked in the back of that van, headed to God knows where. I didn't even want to think of what might have happened to me in the hands of those black-clad men. My vision blurred, and I realized I was starting to cry. I leaned back against the seat, my words trickling to a stop. I felt Jax's hand on my arm, then he gently removed the phone from my hand and held it to his own ear.
Chapter 3. Mr. Senator, this is Jackson Turner, formerly of the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. Your daughter is a little shook up after our encounter, so I'll take over if it's okay with you. Is Ivy all right? The senator's tone was gruff. I didn't let them lay a finger on them, sir. Good. He took a deep breath, as if debating what to tell the stranger on the other end of the line. He must have decided to trust me, because what came next could have been considered classified information. My office received a threat yesterday, one that the FBI considered non-credible. It's clear they made a mistake. What was the threat? It came from an anonymous source. Someone promising to rain pain down on my loved ones if I didn't do what is right. And what's that? They didn't say, the senator replied. My office receives more threats than you'd expect, likely because of my work on several important pieces of legislation. I also serve on several committees and subcommittees, so your guess is as good as mine as to whom I ticked off. Well, whoever it was, they're serious. They wanted to kidnap your daughter, at the very least. I could sense the wheels turning in the senator's head, but he'd yet to give me a lead on who was after his daughter. Can you keep her safe until we figure out what's happening? That depends. They might be low-level thugs who knew enough of her routine to find her at the gym. If I keep her away from her home and other familiar places, she could be fine. On the other hand, if they're organized, they might have intel. Which means they had a bead on her location and could be closing in on her now, using her phone's GPS to find her. Ditch the phone. I will, I assured him. As soon as this call is over. But since you're unsure of the level of adversary we're facing, we should play it safe and assume they have the juice to track your daughter. Which means she needs a security force to keep her safe. Do you have one in the Chicago area? Not at present, but I could have someone assemble a team. No offense, sir, but if you don't know who you're up against, entrusting your daughter to a handful of armed strangers could be playing into their hands. You're a stranger, he pointed out. How do I know you're not in on it? If I were, we'd be having a much different phone call right now. There's nothing to stop me from tying your daughter up and stuffing her in the truck. Or to stop me from doing worse and stuffing her remains in a dumpster. You can trust me. Just look up my record. It's already in front of me, he said, and no offense was meant. I just want Ivy safe. Then we both want the same thing. And the best way to achieve our joint goal is to bring her to DC. Why not lay low until I can get to you with my own security detail? Because if those guys are any good, they can figure out who I am pretty easily. I laid out my reasoning. I can't take her to my place any more than I can take her to yours. And neither of us can use any form of payment linked to our names. So I could try and hunker down with her in some busted motel that takes cash, but the chances of them ferreting us out before you arrive is not insignificant. Better to keep moving, making it more difficult to pinpoint our location. It will also stop them from knowing the moves you're making. Clever, the senator said after a moment. We'll get to work on narrowing down who's behind this threat. You concentrate on keeping my daughter safe. Her life is in your hands." I focused on her angelic features, those big eyes seeming to stare into my soul. "Count on it." I hung up and passed the phone back to Ivy. "You've got 2 minutes to upload anything of consequence to the cloud before we ditch that phone." "It all goes onto the cloud automatically," she said, her face blank as shock was settling in. I retrieved the phone from her hands and dropped it out the window, then backed the car over it. I ran over it a few times until I was certain that no information could ever be retrieved from the device. "We're heading for DC," she said, her voice soft. I nodded. "I'm afraid we can't stop to pick anything up. We've got to hit the road right away." "We should make one stop," she countered. I was just about to launch into an explanation of why we couldn't grab her clothes or let her dog out or whatever inconsequential thing she was going to mention, when she surprised me. "The car doesn't have a windshield." I let out a startled laugh. "You're right. We'll rent a car. But first, we need cash. We can't use any of our cards in case they are sophisticated enough to track us through our cards." I put the car in gear, and we headed to a nearby bank where we both withdrew wads of cash meant to see us through to DC. On our way to a rental car agency near the airport, I put in a call to my best buddy Becker. "Hey man, I need a favor." "Name it." Becker James had been in the same Marine unit as me, and we'd formed a fast friendship. He'd recently retired to set up his own security consulting firm. I'd turned down his offer to join up, assuming it would be too similar to what I'd done for Uncle Sam. I needed a change. I explained my situation. "Long story short, I'll be off the grid in the very near future, so I need you to dig up whatever you can about the senator and anyone who might be nursing a grudge against him." "Can do. Stay safe out there." I hung up, then stepped out of the car to jog over to a nearby trash can. We were still in the bank's parking lot, only one more stop to go before we headed out of town. I got back in my car, but noticed as I was buckling up that Ivy was wiping her face. It was obvious she'd been crying, and that fact made my heart squeeze painfully in my chest. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was coming out in little pants. Not much longer, and she could succumb to a full-on panic attack. I unbuckled her belt, then pulled her across the center console to place her gently in my lap. Putting my arms around her, I held her close and stroked her hair. "Concentrate on your breathing," I said softly, putting her hand on my chest to feel it rise and fall in a normal rhythm. It took a few minutes, but finally I felt her calming down. I had to admit, it felt good having Ivy in my arms. She was like a little girl lost, which made my protective instincts kick into overdrive. "I swear to you," I said, my voice heavy with intensity, "I will keep you safe or die trying."
Chapter 4. It was night. We'd been driving for hours, ever since we traded in Jax's bullet-ridden sedan for a rental car. We coasted through the darkness, passing the border into Ohio. My adrenaline deserted me not long after we ventured into Indiana, and I'd passed out for a few hours, waking up to Jax humming along to a song playing on the radio. "You okay?" he'd asked, giving me a warm smile. I'd nodded, thinking again how lucky I was to have him with me. If he hadn't stopped to chat me up, I could be dead by now. When Jax had held me in the parking lot, his strong arms around me, I'd started to calm down and even felt a little hopeful about making it to safety. It was impossible not to feel better nestled against his broad chest. Jax had dark hair and eyes that were the deep blue of a mountain lake. I could tell that he was in peak physical condition, just from the hardness of his muscles as he held me. If anyone could keep me safe from danger, it was this man. Or Marine, I should say. "Hungry yet?" Even his voice was strong. His tone was assured, filled with a confidence that put me at ease. "I could eat," I replied, even though I was famished. I usually saved my big meal until after the gym, so I'd only had a handful of almonds and a protein shake this morning. Sitting in the sticky booth at a truck stop just off the highway, I was beginning to rethink my hunger as I glanced at the menu. Jax must have seen my expression because he chuckled. What's the matter? Even the bread comes fried at this joint. What's not to like? I dropped the menu and sighed. I think the menu is deep fried too. Jax laughed, then signaled the waitress. We gave her our order, and I inspected the water glass to make sure it was clean enough to drink out of. When I woke up this morning, I wasn't expecting that a cross-country road trip was in my future. I would have made sure to have a big breakfast if I'd known that would be the case. What's the matter with a little comfort food? Jax asked, his tone rife with sarcasm. If it doesn't come covered in gravy, why even eat it? I'm sure your arteries will thank you, I said, unable to hold back a giggle. I like that sound, he said. Do it again. I smiled. I don't giggle on command. It comes naturally. Like heart disease comes naturally to the patrons of this restaurant? I giggled again, unable to help myself. Something like that. As we dug into our plates, I looked back over our day. After the brush with death in the parking garage, we hadn't encountered the van and its thugs again. The conversation with Jax was making me forget how horrible the experience this morning had been, and it was starting to feel like some half-remembered bad dream. Maybe we overreacted, I thought. It was probably some local outfit who had no idea how to track our phones or cards. It felt myself relax a little, enough to settle in and enjoy the company. Jax was handsome, funny, and a better conversationalist than I thought. I almost regretted having to leave the booth to use the restroom. On my way back to the dining room, I passed a payphone and paused. It was probably a good idea to let my father know we were safe and still headed in his direction. I dug out some change from the now overstuffed coin purse I kept tucked in the zippered pocket of my workout leggings, and plunked it into the phone. The phone went straight to voicemail, and I figured my father was screening his calls. Hey, Daddy. It's me. Just wanted to let you know that I'm safe and still on course for D.C. We've stopped for dinner at some hole-in-the-wall diner off the highway right after we crossed the Ohio border. I can't wait to see you soon, even though I wish it was under better circumstances. Love you, Daddy. I hung up and made my way back to the booth. Sliding in, I pushed my plate away from me, no longer able to stomach its contents. Jax noticed my move and smiled. The food in this place might not be the best. That's putting it mildly, I interrupted. He chuckled, then continued, but places like this often have fantastic desserts. What say we order up some pie a la mode before we hit the road? I giggled at his unintentional rhyme. You're a poet and you don't know it. Jax shook his head, his face looking pained. After that crack, you're buying the pie. By the time we were finishing our desserts, things had started to take on a decidedly different atmosphere. It almost had the feeling of a first date, and I didn't mind that one bit. We left some cash on the booth's surface, then headed back out to the car. A few minutes later, and we were on the access road, driving towards the highway. That's when the black SUV came out of nowhere, pulling up next to us and cutting close, trying to make Jax steer the rental car off the road and into the ditch running alongside it. Jax managed to steer us around them, then he hit the gas hard, causing the car to shoot forward like a rocket. They shouldn't have found us this easily, he muttered as he tried to put some distance between the SUV and us. Unfortunately, they were keeping pace, speeding behind us and looking for another opportunity to run us off the road. He shot a glance in my direction. What did you do in the restaurant? I looked at him, eyes wide. What do you mean? They haven't been on us the whole drive until we stopped. If they'd known where we were earlier, they would have ambushed us coming out of the restaurant, so someone must have tipped them off. I know I didn't do anything, so it had to be you. I didn't, I started, trailing off when he fixed me with an angry stare. What was it? Did you use your card in the gas station? You forgot and used your card, didn't you? No, I protested, getting defensive. I've only been using cash. Well, they found us somehow, so tell me what you did. Nothing. I ate with you. I went to the bathroom. Then I remembered the phone call then and knew I was in trouble. I stopped to call my father. His mouth compressed into a line. Hold on tight, because we need to lose these guys or we're screwed. I did as he said, making sure my seatbelt was tight and bracing myself against the dashboard. I couldn't believe I'd let my guard down, and now we were in danger again. I put all of my trust in Jax to get us out of this, like he had the last time. Jax, however, clearly had little trust in me. And right then, I couldn't blame him.
Chapter 5. The SUV was relentless, but there was no way I was going to let them overtake us. It was dark, and the access road bordered the freeway on one side, with the occasional country highway popping up at semi-regular intervals. I knew I was going to have to get us off the access road if I had any chance of getting away from our pursuers. I took a gamble, switching off the car's lights, leaving us in darkness. Ivy gasped, but she didn't comment. My anger was boiling away, and I was unable to believe that she'd called her father at the restaurant. I'd counseled her to be careful, but she hadn't been. At least I was sure of one thing now: the senator's phone was tapped. I couldn't worry about who had enough clout to tap a senator's phone, not now when I had to concentrate on losing our tail. I could make out the reflection of a highway sign coming up on our right. It was time to kick this car chase into high gear. I tapped on the brakes, then hooked the turn, the tires squealing. It took all of my strength to keep the wheel steady and not spin out. I saw the SUV flounder, not being able to take the same tight turn I had. I pushed the pedal to the floor, trying to put as much distance between us as I could while they reversed to try and make it onto the highway. Then I saw exactly what we needed. A field of corn, the stalks high at the end of summer. I didn't waste a moment, but slowed down enough to steer into the corn as quickly as I could. Once we were buried deep enough, I turned off the motor and watched the rearview. If they caught on to our trick, we'd be trapped. But if they missed us, we'd be able to find another route to DC. I held my breath, watching the mirror. Then I felt something touch my hand. It was Ivy. She pulled my hand into her lap and wrapped her own hands around it. I squeezed her back, waiting for the SUV to either stop or drive past. I heard the roar of an approaching vehicle, and counted the seconds until it rushed past, missing the spot where the corn had been pushed flat by our rental car. The breath rushed out of me, and my head fell back against the headrest. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small, and all the anger went out of me faster than a popped balloon. I couldn't stay mad at Ivy. I squeezed her hand again. "I get it. You've never been in a life-or-death situation like this before. But from now on, there's no calling anyone, no using your cards, no drawing attention to yourself, and no leaving any trace. Understood?" Ivy nodded, her bottom lip quivering. When she pinned me with those big green eyes, I couldn't resist temptation any longer. I leaned over, cupping her face and pressing my lips against hers. At first, all I could taste was her sweetness, but she was hesitant, as if kissing were unfamiliar. Then all of a sudden, she started kissing me back, and a wave of pleasure crashed into me. Before I realized it, I had her thick light brown hair clenched in my fist, and I held the back of her head and deepened the kiss. I couldn't get enough of her. Ivy was all that I wanted or needed. And then I remembered I was kissing the daughter of a U.S. senator. I pulled away, apologizing for my forwardness. I know this is no time for romance. Ivy didn't say anything. She just leaned back against the headrest and closed her eyes, a look of bliss on her beautiful face. In that moment, I imagined her sprawled beneath me, sated with pleasure, and it was like taking a hit of rocket fuel. I turned the lights back on and navigated out of the cornfield and back onto the blacktop. We returned to the access road, only long enough to cross underneath the freeway and find another country highway headed south. I kept to the back roads, thankful for the old paper map stuffed into the rental car's glove box. It wasn't long before Ivy fell asleep, exhausted by the insanity of the day. She looked just like an angel, come from heaven to remind me of the good that still existed in the world. I drove for another couple hours, then figured we were due for a rest. I needed to be at my peak if I was going to continue to outsmart these well-connected thugs, which meant a few hours' sleep was a necessity. I stopped at a little roadside motel away from the city lights, making sure to get a room on the back side so the car would be hidden from the road. I parked right in front of the little lobby, so that I could see Ivy asleep in the car while I was talking with the front desk clerk. I was informed they only had rooms with a single queen bed available. As it was only for a few hours, I shrugged and paid in cash. I could resist temptation for long enough to catch a few winks, I figured. Once we were parked in front of our room, I gently shook Ivy. She came awake with a soft smile that made me want to kiss her breathless. Instead, I escorted her into our room. "One bed," she said, eyeing me. It was all they had. Honest. She laughed. "Why did we stop here? I need some sleep. And if they're still looking for us on every country byway, they shouldn't be able to spot us hunkered down here. As long as no one makes any phone calls. I won't. Honest." She made me smile. It was a heady feeling, being in the company of Ivy. I struggled to remember what we'd been talking about. As long as they don't have access to satellite imagery, we should be fine. I climbed into the bed, not bothering to get between the sheets. Sleeping fully clothed was something I'd gotten used to in the service. Ivy lay down beside me, just about as far from me as she could get without falling off the edge. "Good night," she murmured, then turned off the lamp. "Good night," I replied, then wondered how I'd ever fall asleep. My awareness of her next to me was already driving me mad. I didn't think counting sheep was going to work this time.
Chapter 6. It was impossible to sleep next to him. Especially since I couldn't stop thinking about that kiss in the cornfield. And how much I wanted to do it again. I knew I should be scared, but with Jax around to protect me, I was beginning to feel a bit invincible. He'd gotten us out of 2 scrapes and seemed to know exactly how to keep me safe. I'd never felt so protected in my life. It was a good feeling. I finally started to drift off, but fell into a dream featuring a sexy Jax stripped to the waist in front of a roaring fireplace. He beckoned me to join him on the rug, and I did. There was no way I was going to miss this opportunity. In the throes of my dream, I didn't realize that I'd rolled over in my sleep and snuggled close to Jax. When he, also asleep, put his arm around me, it melded seamlessly into the dream, so I wasn't aware of how close we were in reality. The most embarrassing part, however, came next. In the dream, he just run a red rose down my body, looking down into my face. I whispered up at Dream Jax, "Kiss me." It was real Jax, and not Dream Jax, who must have heard me, because I woke up suddenly to the pressure of his lips against mine. It was no longer a dream. This was reality, and I was making out with the hottest guy I'd ever laid eyes on. I kissed him back with a passion, and soon our limbs were intertwined. I was moments away from starting to undress when a sudden noise from the bathroom froze us both. Eyes wide, I watched as Jax carefully climbed out of bed, not making a sound, and held his index finger to his lips. Jax crept toward the bathroom, and I held my breath as he slowly snuck forward. He nodded in my direction, then darted suddenly through the open door. I jumped out of bed when I heard the sounds of a struggle, unsure of what to do. There was just enough light in the room from the walkway outside that I could make out shapes in the dimness. One was the lamp. I grabbed it, unplugging it and holding it tightly to be used as a weapon in case of an emergency. The struggle continued, and I inched my way closer, fear holding my heart in a vice. Suddenly, a pile of limbs engaged in combat tumbled out of the bathroom, and I saw that Jax had the upper hand. He managed to knock a gun out of his adversary's hand, which caused me to let out a little cheer. Jax looked up at the noise, which gave his opponent the opportunity to hit him in the throat. He reeled backwards, and I felt like an idiot. Then I saw my chance to help out. The thug tried to push his way to his feet, and when his back was turned, I brought the lamp down on his head. He crumpled, hitting the floor as the heavy metal base connected with his skull. "Is he dead?" I asked when Jax had recovered enough to answer. "Just unconscious." He eyed me, anger and admiration battling in his expression. Don't ever put yourself in harm's way again, Ivy. Let me handle things. I wanted to pout, but I nodded instead, realizing that I was shaking like a leaf in high winds. Jax picked up the man's gun, then motioned toward the door. We're going to get out of here, but we need to be on guard. It's unlikely this one's alone. I nodded, moving to stand beside him as he peeked behind the curtain on the small window that looked out onto the parking lot. 3 more outside. And they have weapons? Jax turned to touch my face gently. I want you to look down, unless I call your name. Don't look up, just look at the ground. Okay? I wasn't sure why he was asking me to do this, but I trusted him. Okay. He moved to the door, then gestured for me to stand on the other side of it, so I would be behind it when he opened it. Stay here until I tell you to come out. Jax held the gun at the ready. I noticed it had a silencer on the end of the barrel. Then recognition hit me. The guy had been crawling through the bathroom window, intent on sneaking into our room and taking us out quietly. I felt suddenly sick to my stomach. The door swung open, and like a flash Jax was out it. I heard 3 quick pops, and then the sound of something heavy dropping. You can come out, Jax said, but remember, keep your eyes on the ground. I did as he said, and felt his hand grip mine after I had taken a few steps out the door. Expecting to be led to the rental car, I was surprised when we detoured. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black shoe lying on the ground, attached to a foot. Oh my God. He killed them. My whole body started to shake, but I kept my eyes on the ground as I'd been ordered. They were going to kill you, remember? What choice did he have? Jax settled me into the passenger seat of the SUV, then climbed into the driver's side. He had a key ring with a key that fit, and soon we were speeding out of the motel parking lot.
Chapter 7. I could tell Ivy was terrified, and I hated knowing I'd added to her fear. But there was no other way I could think of to get us out of the motel room. They'd set an ambush for us, but the guys outside had been counting on the man in our room to do his job. He'd failed, and they'd all paid the price. I saw her shaking, and guilt washed over me. Thinking that distracting her would be a good idea, I told Ivy to look through the SUV for any clues as to who was stalking her. It took her a few beats to process what I'd said, but soon she leaned forward and opened the glove box, going through its contents. There was nothing of significance there, so she moved to her knees and leaned over the back seat, rifling around in the trash layering the floorboards. Fast food wrappers? Is that why we stole their vehicle? To learn that they like cheap greasy tacos? There was anger in her voice, anger directed at me, but also at the situation. I know you're scared, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it, but the rental car was compromised. The only thing I can think of is that they somehow do have access to satellite imagery. That likely means they're government connected, either our government or a foreign one. I took a shot at finding any hints of who we're dealing with by taking their SUV, but the truth is, we're dealing with some powerful people, and I'm not certain we'll be able to evade them for much longer unless we figure out what's going on. Ivy made a sound that was either extreme frustration or discovery. It turned out to be the latter. She climbed back into the front seat, buckling up before thrusting some kind of candy wrapper under my nose. Look at the text, she said. It's in Cyrillic. I looked at the wrapper and saw what she meant. The candy bar definitely didn't originate in the United States. So we're looking at East Europe. Or the granddaddy of them all, Russia. I thought it was Mother Russia, Ivy said, and we both paused for a second before bursting out into laughter. It was a silly joke, if she even meant it as a joke, but it helped relieve the intense tension we'd been experiencing. We drove until the sun was coming up, then stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of a sizable city. I went inside to pay for the gas and noticed a row of non-smart cell phones behind the counter. A burner phone. That's what we need. I purchased one, along with a thick road atlas, some bottles of water, and a few snacks that would comprise our breakfast, then headed out to pump the gas and distribute the snacks. What's that? Ivy said, pointing at the plastic package in my hand after swallowing a gulp of water. Burner phone. Like drug dealers use? Who are you calling? Becker. My former Marine buddy. He's looking into things for us. I ripped it out of its packaging and tossed it to her after I climbed back into the car. Get it activated. I headed east, following the sunrise, while Ivy fiddled with the phone. At last it was ready. I told her to punch in Becker's number and put him on speaker. She did as directed, then held the phone out near me. Who is this? Becker said as soon as he picked up. It's Jax. I'm calling on a burner. What have you found? Your senator is chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and he's been blocking an arms sale to a small Eastern European country that is heavily backed by Russia. It's likely his adversaries are trying to use his daughter as leverage. That's my best guess, as everything else seems clean. Thanks, man. Becker was a lifesaver. How you holding up? They're closing in. We've got to find a way to DC without getting waylaid. Any ideas? Just run like hell, man. Conversation finished, I rolled down the window and tossed the phone out of it. We could have used that again. Ivy said, upset. To call whom? Not your dad's cell. She crossed her arm and grumbled, we could have ordered a dang pizza. I smiled. Ivy was cute when she was hangry.
Chapter 8. A few hours later, Jax pulled into a truck stop. Why are we stopping? I asked, on edge. Every minute we delayed was another minute we gave the bad guys the chance to find us. We're going to get on the freeway again soon, and I want to make sure we gas up before we do, since it will be a straight shot to DC. He gave me a grin. Besides, if I don't feed you soon, I'm afraid you're going to tear my head off. I rolled my eyes, but followed him inside the truck stop diner. It was just as bad as the last one, but this time I was hungry enough to ignore the sticky booth and the long list of gravy-covered entrees on the menu. We ate quickly, keeping our eyes on the windows that displayed the busy parking lot. Jax laid down some cash, and I told him I needed to visit the restroom before we departed. He nodded. I'll pump the gas. Come straight outside to meet me after. I promised I would, then made my way to the restroom. Inside, I stared at myself in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my eyes bloodshot. Running from thugs bent on killing me was doing terrible things to my complexion. I splashed some water on my face and tried to comb my hair with my fingers into something that didn't resemble a bird's nest, but I wasn't sure how well I did. Finally, it was time to return to the enemy's SUV for a heart-pounding rush into DC, and hopefully safety. Just as I stepped out of the restroom door, I noticed the towering man dressed in black standing right outside it. I moved to push past him, but he grabbed me without warning, clamping a hand over my mouth and dragging me deeper down the hallway and into the employees-only section. I blinked as he tugged me out a back door and realized we were headed for the SUV parked nearby. I could see 3 similarly dressed thugs standing around it, clearly waiting for someone. That someone was me. I knew I had to act fast, otherwise I'd have little chance of escaping when they shoved me into the back of their vehicle. I summoned all my courage, then bit down hard on the hand that was covering my mouth. My abductor let out a curse and moved his hand, loosening his grip enough for me to pull away. I ran as quickly as I could, screaming my head off. If I could just make it to the front of the building, Jax would see me and I'd be safe. Right as I turned the corner, the pump's finally in sight, the thug caught up with me. He yanked me backwards, even as I screamed bloody murder, then shoved his hand over my mouth again. Before I knew it, I was pushed into the SUV, and it sped out of the parking lot at top speed. I collapsed, fear overtaking me. Had he heard me? Had he seen them grab me? I didn't know the answers to those questions. The thug grabbed my hands and bound them together with a zip tie. Keep quiet, he said, and I noticed an accent, Eastern European or Russian. It seemed Becker was right on the money with his intel. Just keep calm and pay attention, I told myself. Look for any opportunity to escape. There didn't seem to be any, however, as we sped down the country highway and into empty fields. We were heading away from the freeway and civilization, and I had no idea where they were taking me. Jax will save me. The thought popped into my mind, and it immediately filled me with calm. He'd been my savior so far, and I had to trust that he'd find a way to save me again. I realized then that I was head over heels in love with my former Marine. Even though we'd only known each other for a handful of hours, I knew he was the man for me. Now I just hoped I could survive long enough to see him again.
Chapter 9. I'd heard the scream when I was putting the nozzle back in the gas pump, and I knew immediately that it was coming from Ivy. But where was she? Suddenly, she shot out from the side of the building, and my brows furrowed. What was she doing over there? And why was she running? Then I saw the man in black behind her. He grabbed her, pulling her back behind the building again. My heart leapt into my throat. I ran as fast as I could towards the side of the building, but when I got there, an SUV rushed past, peeling out in the gravel before hitting the blacktop access road. I let out a string of curses as I rushed back to our SUV, then slammed it into gear and took off after them. How dare they touch my Ivy? I'll break every bone in their filthy hands for this. I already thought of Ivy as mine, and there was no way I was letting a band of thugs take her away from me. I drove the SUV to its limit, redlining the engine as I fought to catch up with the other vehicle. Grabbing the gun from where I tucked it into my waistband, I made sure it was accessible. Then I pulled up alongside the other SUV and took a calculated risk. I whipped the SUV around in front of them, making the other vehicle screech to a halt or risk colliding head-on into me. Out of the ride in a flash, I pointed my gun at the first thug to jump out, demanding Ivy's release. His gun was drawn, and he didn't hesitate, firing in my direction. Thanking God for his terrible aim, I threw myself forward, lunging for him and knocking him to the ground. I went down with him, slamming his head against the pavement, until I knew he was unconscious. Another thug was closing on me, so I pulled up my gun, aimed, and fired. It hit his knee and he dropped, screaming in pain. I closed on him, kicking the gun away, then shoved my gun into the passenger side as the door opened, shooting the thug before he could step foot out of the vehicle. Unfortunately, there was still one man left standing, and he decided to use Ivy as a human shield. I was beyond furious, ready to rip the man to shreds with my bare hands. Slowly and deliberately, I stepped around the front of the vehicle, my arm extended, gun pointed right at the thug's head. "Let her go." "Not a chance," the thug replied, his accent giving him away. Becker was right. This was all some arms deal strong arm tactic. But they'd picked the wrong girl to mess with. "If I find so much as a scratch on her, I'm going to make sure you die a very painful death. Back away, or the senator's daughter is dead, and I make sure they pin it on you." It was clear the remaining thug wasn't going to back down. It was time to make my move or risk losing Ivy forever. But I couldn't chance shooting him, not with her so close to him. I couldn't imagine my agony if I somehow killed the woman I loved. And I did love Ivy more than I loved sunshine. More than I loved air. I wanted to live and breathe Ivy for the rest of my life. Which meant I needed to find a way to rescue her, and quick. I was calculating my next move when Ivy suddenly jerked in the man's arms. I watched as she drove an elbow into his midsection, making him double over. It was the opportunity one needed, and I flung myself at him, attacking his arm and making him drop his weapon. I threw a haymaker at his face, and he dropped, his lights thoroughly knocked out. Ivy leapt into my arms, letting out a shout of joy. "You came for me," she said, pressing her cheek against mine. I realized it was wet with tears and I felt a pain in my chest. "I will always come for you." I kissed her then, like a hurricane hitting land, and she kissed me back with equal fury. Then I broke away, realizing that the thugs could wake up at any moment. I took a minute to shoot out their tires, then scrambled back to our SUV, Ivy in tow. As we sped away, I grabbed her delicate hand, squeezing it tightly. That was quick thinking back there. Congratulations on beating the bad guy. All in a day's work, she said, dusting her hands together as if defeating a band of foreign adversaries was something she did all the time. She was so adorable I couldn't stop smiling. My heartbeat finally started to slow, relief filling me. I had Ivy back, and as soon as we hit that freeway, we'd be on a straight path into Washington, D.C. It looked like we had a real chance of making it to safety, against all the odds. Ivy leaned over, pressing a kiss to my cheek. What was that for? I asked, unable to help the grin on my face. Thank you for rescuing me. If you hadn't turned up, I don't know what would have happened. You don't have to thank me, I said, my tone heavy with meaning. There's no way I could have left you with those thugs. Then I chuckled. Although maybe I should have. It looked like you could have taken out the lot on your own. Punching me playfully in the arm, Ivy laughed. It was the best sound I'd ever heard in my life.
Chapter 10. Traffic was heavy, and in the distance I could see the buildings that made up downtown DC. I almost couldn't believe that we'd made it. Our mad dash had paid off, and now it was almost over. I should have been relieved, but that wasn't the feeling coursing through me at that moment. Instead, I felt sad. It wasn't like I missed the danger of being chased by a band of thugs. I wasn't an adrenaline junkie. No, my addiction was a different one. I was hooked on Jax, and I knew we were about to part ways. I didn't want that, but I also didn't see any way around it. Jax's life was back in Chicago. Mine was about to be in DC. For the foreseeable future. I knew my overprotective father wasn't going to let me out of his sight for quite a while, so I wasn't sure when I'd make it home again. By the time I did, I'd probably be an old woman and Jax would have long forgotten me. He'll probably be relieved to get away from your chaos, I told myself. I mean, what guy wants to hook up with someone who seems to attract armed assassins? It was late afternoon by the time we finally reached Capitol Hill. When I gave my name at the entrance, we were immediately surrounded by security forces and led into the building. Our escort took us to my father's office, and the moment he saw me, Dad leapt out of his chair and embraced me. "Oh, princess," he murmured, "I thought I was never going to see you again." "Daddy," I said, burying my head in his chest for a moment. I quickly pulled myself together, realizing we were surrounded by people and our tearful reunion would have to wait. "You have Jax to thank for me getting here safely," I said, gesturing toward my companion. Yes, your Marine escort." "Happy to help," Jax said with a nod. I noticed he was standing straight, his hands behind his back, giving the impression of a military pose. "Thank you for your service, son," my father said, putting his hand on Jax's shoulder. "You brought me back the most precious cargo of all." "Sir, if I may, I have some information that may be relevant." Dad nodded, then shooed away the non-essential personnel from his office. "Lay it on me." Jax told him about Becker and about what he'd discovered. My father nodded. "This matches the intel we got off the CIA. We've already put a team on it." "One more thing, sir. Your phone is tapped." My father frowned, pulling his phone from his pocket and handing it to his assistant. "Get this to the FBI. I want to know who's listening." He turned back to us. "Good work, son," he said, patting Jax on the back. "I've decided to offer you a reward for bringing my daughter to me safely." "No reward is needed," Jax said. "Making sure Ivy is safe is its own reward." Warmth filled me at his words. Jax never failed to surprise me, and I wished then that he would stick around so I could learn more about him. And experience more surprises. "I do have one request, sir," Jax said. "Name it." My father sat behind his desk, motioning Jax into the chair across from him. "I want you to issue Ivy her own security detail, at least until this whole issue is resolved. She's still in danger until you root out the ones who are trying to use her as leverage against you." "You're right, son, and we've already started the process of assembling one. Rest assured I'm not going to willingly put my daughter in danger." "Not ever." "Of course, sir," Jax responded. This security detail will need a point person. I'd like to suggest a former Marine skilled in hand-to-hand combat, weapons tested, and who knows how to drive defensively. My eyes widened. Was Jax talking about himself? Hope exploded in my chest, but I held my breath until I knew for certain. My father looked from Jax to me, then back to Jax. This Marine sounded like a perfect fit for the security detail. However, you may want to consult with my daughter privately on the matter, since she's the one who'll be interacting with the detail on a daily basis. Dad gestured toward the small conference room attached to the main office. Why don't you two go in there, and Ivy, you can get the candidates' full qualifications. When the conference room door was shut behind us, I turned to Jax. What are you doing? I care too much about you, he responded. I can't leave here without knowing you're fully protected. He took a step forward, pulling me into his arms. Besides, that job is mine now. I'm your protector, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you. I blinked up at him, overwhelmed with emotion. Are you sure you want the job? Positive. That's a good thing, because you have the job for life now. Jax's face broke into a wide smile. I love you. It was my turn to grin like an idiot. I love you too. When he kissed me, I knew that he was the only man I'd ever want. Jax was strong, caring, and intelligent. I knew he would keep me safe, and that he'd cherish me for the rest of his days. It was a good thing too, because now that I had him, I was never going to let him go. What say we celebrate this arrangement with some dinner? I know a greasy spoon diner where the gravy comes in actual boats. Jax laughed, then kissed me again until I almost forgot my own name. We walked out of the conference room hand in hand, and my father gave me a wink and a nod. Happy to have Dad's approval, I pointed out something crucial. These security details come with uniforms, right? I asked, trying to hold back my laughter. Jax looked at me, puzzled, but my dad nodded. Yes, of course. Why? I jerked my thumb at Jax. Because he's been wearing his stinky gym clothes for 2 days now and he could use a change. My father tossed his head back and laughed, but Jax shook his head. Grabbing my hand, he started leading me out of the office. Where are we going? To find the closest hotel. Why? I asked, giddy. Because we're going to take a long, hot shower together before I take you to bed. I smiled. You can guard my body any day, handsome.
The end.